Thank you, Keith. How do you explain the analysis of the data from the peer project that were inconsistent with decision augmentation theory, but consistent with a bitwise influence model?
In terms of the bitwise influence model, I think that is an experimental effect altogether. They got some data, some results really early on that showed that if they increased their bit frequency from 200 bits to 2,000 and 20,000, they seemed to get better results. They then had Michael Ibbison come along as a visiting fellow, and he restructured their random number generator, made a new random number generator, and set up a whole experimental program, and which looked at increasing the bit rate up to 2 million bits per second. And he seemed to get a magnification effect. And I'm not sure whether that was real. I visited Pear and I decided I was going to carry that experiment on, and I took it from 2 million up to 16 bits per second. And I also got a significant result. And I published that paper and I was very proud of it, but it didn't get statistical significance. So I thought, right, I'm going to take it up to 800 million bits per second. It was quite complicated to get a random number machine to do that, but I did. And I've run that experiment as a replication, trying to get statistical significance. And what seems to be statistically significant is that 200 bits per second gets the best results, not 800 million bits per second. So the whole thing seems to have vanished. So my conclusion from that, I learned to my embarrassment quite a lot. My conclusion from that is that I think it is really all experimental effect. It's nothing, there's nothing there at all.
On Thursday, on day one of our conference, there was a very interesting presentation about a martial artist with many PK demonstrations, alteration of the EM fields, controlling of big mobiles, or locking books. How can this be integrated with this theory? This would not explain action at a distance.
You're quite right. It wouldn't explain action at a distance. I would be reluctant to apply this theory to that case because I might embarrass myself or other people. But I am basically saying that I don't think PK works the way J.B. Rhine thought that it works. And if people have got evidence for it, it certainly undermines my idea that all of ESP is precognition.
How do you propose blocking out the future when past, present, and future are all coexistent and ambiguously distributed in the universe?
I agree that that's a difficult problem. Dean Radin says it's a difficult problem as well. I'm not sure that it's very easy to answer that question at this stage. All I'm really saying is that if we get information from the future, we really need to take that into account in our experiments, and we need to cope with it somehow. I've got some ideas about how to do it, but it's really difficult. I agree, it's really difficult. So I'm not proposing any way to do it at this stage.
Okay, there's quite a few questions, really. I'm just going to read them, but I think you just answered all of them here. How can one theoretically block future influences upon experiments? We don't know yet, right? This is the dilemma that you're having.
Yes.
And then another one says, so somebody who has a high score on IQ tests might not just be using their knowledge, but getting the answers from the answer book in the future. Is there any way to test for that? So same thing, no, I guess.
Yes, that's right. I think there's an opportunity here for experimentalists to figure out a way of doing this. That's partly why I've given a couple of tests there. But the more I've thought about it since then, it almost seems to me as if we need to look very closely at the experimental effect and what it's doing, so that we can understand how it can be influencing or biasing our experimental results.
And then one of the attendees says they believe there are positive experiments where no feedback is given. How would you explain them?
Yes, I agree. I agree that there are positive experiments where no feedback is given. I agree that's the case. As long as you go far enough into the future, there may be other ways that people get the information because they might not get feedback other than saying you did well, and that may be enough for them to find a way using precognition to choose what answers they're going to give. I don't know. I'm really just putting this out there as a thought experiment and saying if precognition is what we think it is, then there's some consequences, and we better take them into account.
Keith, I think I met you at an SSE conference a few years ago, and we were having conversations about this same topic, because I think you're right. This is a very difficult methodology issue to address. And I developed a study and actually published it a couple years ago in the JP, related to having a unconscious PK experiment with no feedback and completely blinded to all participants and to me.
Yeah.
So my goal was to try to eliminate the experimenter effect, because I don't have any knowledge of what's going on. And the evaluation, here was the trick. The evaluation that I did, the analysis was blinded to me. It was automated. And so I only saw the aggregate results, never a result for an individual participant. All of this is done in an attempt to kind of piece this apart and try to address some of the things that we've been talking about. If you haven't seen the paper, I'm be happy to send it to you if you'd like to. But do you think that this is the sort of approach that I think would be valuable for other people in the field to take, to try to learn whether we are dealing with precognition?
Thank you very much, John. I suspected there would be papers out there. I don't read the literature as much as perhaps I should. I'd love you to send it to me. Mm-hmm. One of the things that may be happening, and Bob Jean picked this up, he said that a number of the experiments, it seems to get the result at from the conceptual level. In other words, you can think up an experiment. I don't know if you did this. You think up an experiment, you say, I'm going to exclude myself from this, but you have already made some decisions about the experiment, and those decisions may be influenced from the future. It's really tricky to do.
Right. Well, it's hard to remove yourself from a study whenever you're, first of all, I talked to Ed May, and he always talks about your cherished hypothesis. You hold on to it so tight, and not just me. This is we have these things that we hold on to so tight, and we want to see them succeed. And this is where it becomes tricky. How do we remove ourselves from that and eliminate that influence? It is a really, really difficult problem to solve.
Yes, I agree. But if it's there and we just say, oh, it's too hard, so we'll ignore it, I think that's a flaw in what we're doing.
Exactly. We have to, our job is hard.
Yes.
This is what we have to do it, though. All right. Lauren, were there other questions? I hadn't been following the chat.
Yeah, there's a few more questions here. So Keith, but there's a time dimension. So what about an experiment when a dog gets excited, when the owner looks intently to it through a camera? How do you explain that?
I think that you could explain it with my method. It takes a little bit of thinking about, but the dog is getting the message precognitively. And yeah, these ones where people have a premonition, it's similar to the ones where people have a premonition, and then they say, it was exactly at the same time as this happened that I had this premonition was happening. I'm not sure that it is exactly at the same time, and most of them are quite variable in time. And I think it's potentially the person is aware, they have their mind, their precognitive capability is always aware and waiting for information. If the information comes through and it's got a date, a timestamp on it when something is supposed to happen, my theory would say they wait until that time happens, or until they think that time happens at 3 o'clock in the morning or something, and then they suddenly wake up with having had a bad dream. So I can see that we can apply, I maybe haven't explained it very well, but I can see that we could apply this reframed method to that dog experiment.
Telepathic targeting effect could be explained by phase-related interference should there be an information field like entity carrying the thought. This is just my 2 cents to not rule out other possibilities in trying to explain telepathy. Can you please comment?
I really don't want to tread on the toes of people who put lots of effort in, but and I don't know anything really about Bayesian analysis. But I would stick to my guns and say that I believe telepathy can be explained by the precognitive process. I haven't answered that very well, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you for your presentation.